welcome Tim Shantz and Chris Uhas from History Factory. It's these guys that completely changed my perspective on what heritage really is. They run a fantastic company out of mostly out of the DMV area, where they, I guess, curate and make available corporate heritage collections for a variety of reasons. So the title today is How History Factory Applies Standard Practices and Specialized Approaches to Meet Client Needs. Chris Uhas is a certified archivist and History Factory's Senior Director of Archives and has 20 years of experience providing archival and digital archive services to academic, corporate, public, and nonprofit institutions. He works with clients to build and manage archival programs that combine state-of-the-art content management technologies with library science best practices. Chris excels at designing and implementing archival information systems for clients whose resources are decentralized, fragmentary, and largely inaccessible to potential audiences, plural. He and his team strive to make the archival function more proactive and service-oriented to enable clients to more easily use their institutional heritage and archival content to support existing future goals. Tim Shantz. Tim Shantz has been History Factory's Managing Director of Archives and Content Solutions for the past 6.5 years. Tim relies on the guiding principle that protecting and preserving raw digital and physical material of our clients' heritage is of both great responsibility and an opportunity to provide innovative solutions for using their heritage to inform and support their future. Heritage is his passion, and he is proud to oversee expert archival team that creates sustainable archival programs in accordance with best practices, but customized to clients' business needs and priorities. His goal has always been to ensure that History Factory's archival advice and work secure the sanctity and content for the future generations of business goals by making certain that it's relevant and accessible today. I can't say enough about these two gentlemen, and a warm welcome to you both. So I'm going to turn my camera off and let you guys take center stage.
Sure. Turn it over to our expert, Chris Uhas. Maybe a brief word is appropriate to tell you a little bit about who we are and why we were asked to speak to you today. Our firm, History Factory, has been in business for over 41 years. It's an agency whose expertise spans everything from building and preserving archival collections and making them broadly accessible, which explains our key strategic partnership with Digital Transitions and Pixel Acuity, to the function of research, the creation of authentic living history through oral history and discovery programs, curation of content, interpretation, design and storytelling, basically everything from museums to exhibits to books, physical and digital, content banks, websites, social media, and of course, anniversary planning and execution. Our mantra from our inception has been to start with the future and work back. Essentially, what we are endeavoring to do is to give history contemporary relevance by speaking to stakeholders and audiences in ways and in formats that resonate broadly with them. While it is true that our approaches were initially designed for the corporate market, these concepts apply broadly to all entities and collections. That is, the ROI, or the return on investment, of archives, making them affordable and sustainable over time, where in the adopted words of Mies van der Rohe, less truly can be more. On that note, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Uhas, who will carry you through our presentation. Chris?
I'm going to advance here and give a quick overview of what we intend to cover today. So, as an introduction, I want to talk about the fact that because of the relative invisibility of our work, there's an understandable, I think, speculation and perhaps misperception that the way we practice archives differs in some way from the way it's done in more traditional settings. This presentation is intended to be sort of a virtual open house that'll give a behind the scenes look at our operations in the archives lab. The idea was to highlight for you the methods we use for performing main archival functions. The four that you see here: selection, arrangement, description, and digitization. The idea is to highlight that the way we perform those functions is consistent with those of the broader community. We also want to point out that some practices that are less commonly employed by the profession are of specific or special importance to our work. We'll give some brief practical examples of those methods in action as we move through, and then we'll present some more detailed case studies at the end that will give you an even better sense of how we do what we do. So the first thing we'll talk about today is the practice of selection. So it's a universal principle, as those of you who are involved in the archival profession know, that collections and collection materials should only be retained permanently if they have certain value. The archivist's job is to be looking for those materials, any materials that do not have those values, and to remove them from their repository to make room for more important content. In business archiving, more so perhaps than in any other type of collecting, the amount of investment made in archival processing and maintenance is directly proportional to the potential use of the resources. So whenever we need to re-examine or examine a collection for retention value, we follow the same step-by-step analysis and procedure that all archivists follow to determine where there's a need to withdraw out of scope material. And the four measures that we use in evaluating content are the same as well. Quality, meaning the level of detail in the records, the significance of the time period covered, the quality or visual content of the records. Projected use is huge. Materials that provide information that for which there's a demand. And of course, certain formats of records are preferred because of things like the cost to maintain them and the type of use, ease of access, and then duplication is I think sort of a no-brainer. If we already have a sufficient number of copies, there's no need to retain additional. Ways that we differ, however, or ways, again, this is not necessarily a unique practices of History Factory, but things that are less commonly employed across the profession. We sort of face the fact quite often that not everything that has been saved is worth saving. The business archives are often the result of indiscriminate saving. And those accumulations tend to be unmanageable by our clients for two main reasons, bulk being the first. The funds available for storage and preservation are usually limited, and they're expected to shrink over time. And it's impossible for our core clientele to justify the cost of providing care for anything that is inessential or low quality or redundant. The second reason is intellectual control and access. The unsystematic growth gives rise to the problem of overload. Useless material crowds out more valuable, and it's difficult to even understand what information is. So restructuring collections, in other words, taking deaccession action to remove inessential content from expensive archival storage conditions, is commonly a first phase intervention for us. And the goal is to achieve a necessary level of program sustainability. In addition to disposition strategy development being a core competency and deliverable of History Factory, this two-level management concept is also a big part of how we do what we do. Deciding how to maintain materials, so things likely to be consulted less frequently are maintained in an active archival state, open and accessible, and things that are likely to be less used or transitioned to lower cost, semi-active or inactive. And that could mean moving those materials to a record center that is far less costly to maintain than it is in our archival storage facility. Or it could mean simply, storing material in a more high density configuration in order to make it to stretch the dollar, but perhaps sacrifice some of the ease of access. The first brief illustration I have on this topic for this topic of selection is work that we did for TIAA. If you're familiar with TIAA, at the time that we worked for them, they were still TIAA CREF. We took possession of their archives, and in its original size, it was somewhere close to 1,300 linear feet, or about 1,500 boxes of material. The size of the collection was unmanageable for the organization. They had to figure out a strategy for right sizing it to make it economical and to justify and get it to a point where they could actually afford to keep it, basically. And so we conducted a box by box inspection and careful reappraisal of the collection to find areas where we could remove content. The results of that investigation showed that almost half of the collection was made up of what I would describe as transitory material that was not of sufficient quality to justify continued keeping. And a huge problem was duplication, which this photograph is intended to show. Far too many copies of the same document were retained in the collection, and cumulatively the result was overgrowth and unmanageable overgrowth. So the results of the reappraisal were the separation, withdrawal of almost 750 linear feet of material, which you see palletized here before we took the disposition action. We made recommendations about disposition, of course, and documented every decision that we made down to the file level, sometimes to the document level, and went through a careful approval process with the client. Ultimately, the client made the decision to destroy the content, which was fully appropriate. And this photograph shows the end result of that removal. Today, the client has been able to sustain the archives program and to invest more dollars in activities like digitization, additional collecting initiatives, all things that have led to a degree of sustainability that was our original intended outcome. So let's talk a bit about arrangement. So at History Factory, like it is everywhere where archivists do their work, the process of grouping similar items together and positioning those groupings physically in relation to each other is done by archivists and the History Factory archivists. And it's done for the same reasons, because it creates a basic structure that ties collections together, and it provides useful pathways for finding content based on subject matter. We also determine those structures the same way archivists do elsewhere, existing file structures where they are found, content and format, context of creation, and projected use. Hierarchies are how we do it, just like archivists do it elsewhere. And we also assign a unique reference code to units of material that actually represent the position of the material in the hierarchy. So those are all standard practices that we employ. Some less common approaches that we take because of our unique client situations and the unique requirements of our clients are artificial order, right? Most business collections start out as a jumble of very loosely related parts from a lot of different sources. And I'm specifically referring to business archives that have accumulated over time but have never had professional oversight or management. They start out very loosely interconnected. And so, identifying logical groupings within an original order, which may be the preferred practice and the best practice, is often not possible because there is no coherent original order. And so we are almost 99% of the time establishing order, artificial order. We also use what I'm calling faceted schemes, so subject-based, almost classification structures that move from general facets to more specific subject concepts. We found over years of our experience working for corporate clients, these types of subject-based arrangements are simpler and more durable than functional or origin-based schemes. And again, origin-based and functional are often difficult because the records don't tell us many times where they came from or who was responsible for their creation specifically within an organization. Also, corporate structure, if any of you are familiar with corporate organizations, corporate structure changes a lot over time, and maintaining an arrangement system based on corporate structure is often a losing battle. The last piece is participatory design, whereas archivists in traditional settings may largely develop these arrangements on their own and publish them out without any involvement from any audiences or user groups. We have to, because of the nature of our relationships with clients, engage in sort of a co-design effort, and our arrangements reflect sometimes high degree of input from our client and user stakeholders. Tim, I'm going to give you a chance to talk. Would you like to talk a bit about the McCormick case study we have?
For our firm and for them, of course. This was a collection in which significant sums had been invested to organize it and build it back in the 1980s. Hence our continual emphasis on the topic of sustainability, because over the years it had become neglected. It had degenerated into literally a chaotic state, and was commonly rated, if you will, for content, and then things returned in a jumbled state, if at all. So fast forward to some years back, and the company recognized that it needed help yet again. So they turned to History Factory, and we gave them a strategic plan for developing their collection. And I think, one of the things that is really important about our work, and Chris has done a great job in dispelling this notion that often attaches to the archival profession, that we are just hoarders of content. Quite the contrary. One of the core foundation marks of what we do, as he pointed out, is the area of selection. And within selection, there is also a gradation of priorities. For those of you who still hold cash in hand, I would refer to the rear of a dollar bill and the famous state seal or national seal of the United States with the eye of Providence looking out over a pyramid, as you see here. The important aspect of this, of course, is that many clients will come to us with this notion at the outset, digitize everything. That is often economically and strategically unjustifiable. So we will often have to compartmentalize the collection to that apex of the pyramid and things that lie below it. We often refer to these at the History Factory as the golden nuggets that are most engageable to broad audiences, and which are therefore prioritized for digitization. McCormick represents an interesting case study in this regard, because it illustrates the interplay of a physical collection with a digitized collection, with the integration of digitally born content together, and the various stages that those are represented, both in the archival cataloging database, and then ultimately in a digital interface for those assets that are frequently reused and repurposed. Next slide, please. So you can see in these two you can see in these two illustrations how a vast sea of not just documentary and image-based components of the collection, but actual three-dimensional objects and artifacts representing the McCormick business were codified and then ultimately preserved and safely stored for future generations. Chris, do you want to dive into the hierarchy and archival structure?
Sure. Yeah. So the illustration here is that where there was, as Tim pointed out, chaos after years of neglect, History Factory had to return and establish the order. And the order included both that early image that you saw of our staff archivist, Tracy, going through the painstaking process of sorting through thousands of bottles and boxes of spices and flavorings and extracts, and then organizing them into housings, and then, of course, positioning them in relation to one another according to this hierarchy. This is a view of our cataloging utility that just shows how products as a category was organized by the team. So just to give you a sense of how we approach the arrangement process when there is no order. Moving on to description, probably the most labor-intensive and time-intensive work that archivists do, but of course the work that results in the most value, and perhaps many archivists would say is the most satisfying dimension of their job. At History Factory, we follow the principle of know what you have and where it is, just like archivists and collection managers do in every setting. We keep detailed records of collections for security and accountability, not just access. We follow the same strategies and processes for actually constructing description, basic processes that have been sort of time tested, interpreting and extracting information from material and formatting it in various output systems. And we apply standards, not just standards that define the elements of metadata recorded when we describe collection resources, but which also ensure that when we populate metadata elements, the same terms are used consistently. So our profile relies here on ISADG, Dublin Core primarily for structure and approach. And we also use established vocabularies and thesauri, as well as local terms lists for data value standards. Some less common approaches, however, are that single level description is pretty much all we do. Unlike in other repositories where a lot of work goes into developing multi-level descriptions and descriptions that flow from collection level down to box level inventories, we catalog at the item or filing unit level. We build searchable catalogs as our principal product. This is for a very specific reason, because we have service levels, the client expectations to meet. The item level or filing unit level catalog has been the only way for us to facilitate the kind of rapid and precise retrieval that our client user groups require. We need low reference cycle time and high search effectiveness for our client end users. So for those clients who have direct access to the descriptive output of History Factory, we want their search results to be accurate, relevant, and complete. And so the catalog is the best way to achieve those ends. In recent years, the notion of schema matching and mapping has become a bigger part of what we do. And what I mean by that in this context is, digitization processes often end in the transitioning of the digital content to a system that History Factory is not maintaining. We'll take digital content and perhaps we may digitize original physical source material that was cataloged by our archival staff many years ago and digitize it now. And we need to make sure that that data can be made available in whatever system the client specifies. And that often requires us to transform that data. And so transformation of data and mapping of data, both old and newer, is important. Oftentimes the client will specify a system or repository tool that doesn't support our schema. And so we'll have to map. It's a much more common activity for our archivists now than it was when I started my career here, that's for sure. Also, we mean mapping very old descriptive data, perhaps from print finding aids and card catalogs or legacy CMSs, to a new structure. That is also a big part of what we are doing today, and I'll give you an example of that in our short case study here. So I have system independent products here too, because increasingly we are providing what I'll call metadata as a service. We're not using a single solution or a single repository system to structure and format and record and store data and manage it long-term for our clients. We're often just producing the data itself and handing it over as a deliverable at the end of a project, again, so that it can live in a client-owned and administered system. So we're finding ourselves working more often in tools like Airtable, or writing directly to a database system that is not connected to a commercial collections management system, using things like low tech systems like Excel documents, Access databases, and Google Sheets, just to be able to create files that are required by the client, whether those are text files or JSON files or XML documents. These are becoming more commonly the deliverables that we need to produce for our clients. I have Firestone Tire and Rubber Company as an example to highlight some aspects of description for you today. So History Factory removed the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company archives from the University of Akron several years ago. If any of you are familiar, Firestone Tire and Rubber Company archives is considered to be the oldest corporate archives in the country. It is
Chris.
Yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt. Can you just repeat from the beginning on Firestone, because you dropped audio for a second?
Sure, absolutely, sure. The point I was making is that the Firestone Archives is regarded as the oldest corporate archives in the country. It has enormous significance both to American history and to the study of science-based businesses in America, but it also has enormous significance to the archival profession because of the fact that it was one of the first formal structured, systemized archives in a business organization in the country. History Factory took over responsibility for restructuring, remodeling the collection for Bridgestone Americas. And what you're seeing here is about just shy of 4,000 linear feet of material on 70 pallets in a tire testing facility in Akron, Ohio, which we packed over the course of a week, being prepared to be loaded onto tractor trailers to be taken to a company-owned facility in Florida. What we inherited, I'm sorry, I didn't have that image up. Sorry about that, folks. There's the image I was trying to show you. Sorry about that. What we inherited when we started work on the Firestone collection is a broad range of descriptive tools, finding aids that have been created over many years of administration of the Firestone collection, from card catalogs like what you see here to an entire library of written guides and calendars and inventories and other types of descriptive aids. There's another example of an old written finding aid, probably from the late 1940s, early 1950s. Our work over the course of the past 5 years has resulted now in one of those filing unit item level catalogs I described earlier, where the company now has granular access to content in the collection. And the database is up to over 31,000 entries and counting. We still have 2 more years worth of work on the collection. So by the end of the process, we will probably have a database with over 50,000 entries, which will be an extraordinarily powerful tool for the company to use, and has given a great deal of visibility and security, frankly, to the client that they did not have when the collection was in the custody of the university. Moving to digitization. I think it goes without saying that digitization is a part of our work. It's a part of all archivists' work these days, and thanks to digital transitions and groups like Pixel Acuity. It's the reason why we're gathered together today, largely. So delivering content in digital form affords our primary user base, just as it does all archives user bases, the freedom to retrieve information remotely and to conduct full text searches. And it provides the ability to reuse and analyze content in new ways. And it unlocks content for new uses. We follow the same processes that all archivists follow, a standard procedure for how to plan digital work. We go through a nomination process where collection materials are identified for scanning using criteria that are common across our business. Informational value, association with important individuals, places, events, and of course, anticipated demand from users. And our capture is done at appropriate levels of compliance with accepted quality standards. Where we differ, perhaps, is that we don't select for digitization at the sort of series or collection level as is done in many places. We have to select at the item level more often than not. And this is because, the required investment for conversion is still significant, dollars for every page converted. And we have to tie digital collection development to our clients' business and program goals and the needs of the target customers within the organization. And so we have to spend the money wisely, and spending the limited dollars wisely means looking across an entire body of corporate records and getting down literally to the individual resource level to create an appropriate cross-section or sampling of material that will deliver the greatest value in the end. We also have the full text first approach, the ability to turn or having the content of text-based resources available for searching is an enormous benefit to clients. Clients are very interested in having the ability to access the information contained in things like internal publications and series of reports and other types of documents that contain rich information and facts and data. So often the publications and textual materials are first on that prioritized list of materials for scanning. And of course, visual materials follow closely behind. Photographic records are a high priority as well.
Before we dive into this specific case study, maybe it's good to provide a little bit of context here, because it's an excellent illustration in an era in which something like 2/3 to 3/4 of all of the cumulative market value of an enterprise is represented by its intangible value. And this is a case illustration in which the brand value of heritage comes to the fore in multiple dimensions. Just a little bit of background, this collection didn't even exist until Chris and his team really created it through an extensive discovery program that really sourced content for the firm. And its original interest was on the liability mitigation component of the spectrum of archival use cases. And by its end, one of its primary applications is in actual revenue enhancement through design features that are deployed out of the collection. So this is a very important part of the equation that we bring to clients to generate ROI. That is cost savings through both access efficiency that leads to effective use of content, as well as liability mitigation, to revenue enhancement, where heritage assets can be deployed in revenue generating activities and licensing revenues, to that less tangible component of the equation, which is in the actual enhancement of brand value. You put those three together and the justification for an underpinning of investment is relatively more discernible to a broader representation of the C-suite when spoken about in these terms. Chris, do you want to dive in?
So in illustration of the full text first approach, one of the primary drivers for archival change at New Balance was the need on the part of the intellectual property lawyers to have access to the collection of catalogs and other marketing collateral that had been saved since the late 1970s, early 80s.
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but we kind of lost you just for a couple seconds there.
I'm sorry, am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, great. I apologize, folks, for the audio problems. One of the primary drivers for archival change at New Balance was the need on the part of the intellectual property lawyers to have access, digital access, full text search access to their collection of catalogs and other marketing collateral. These documents were constantly used by the legal team in demonstrating first use of a mark or technology in commerce, to defend their intellectual property against infringement, and also to counter claims of infringement. And so it was an easy sell to actually get them to invest in the digitization of the entire series of catalogs and to make them available online in a searchable format. So important there, as Tim said, from a risk mitigation standpoint. But also there was an element that Tim was referring to for supporting product development and design functions within the organization. The product developers at New Balance wanted access to digital representations of actual specimens of the product because, as I'm sure you're all aware, reissues and anniversaries and reissuing of old shoe designs is a big part of the company's business, and so we actually went shoe by shoe and made individual recommendations for which we felt were best to convert to electronic through visual documentation processes. So we photographed 400 pairs of shoes, which now resulted, which resulted then in the ability on the part of those designers to actually examine the shoes without having to handle the originals or for us to have to put them on loan. So extremely valuable end result to the company, and also served a preservation function. I want to get a little bit deeper into some larger case studies. I'll walk through one, and then Tim will take another. I want to talk a bit about our work for SherwinWilliams Company. If you're all not familiar, this is a paint and coatings company based in Cleveland, Ohio. Over 150-year-old company. When we first started working with Sherwin-Williams, the company had two very different heritage resources. The first is what you're seeing in the photograph here, the Center of Excellence, which is the celebrated historical exhibition space that saw a great deal of traffic since its opening in 2004. Many documented and undocumented visitors. It contributed to increased awareness among company stakeholders of the importance of the history of the organization, and also the relevance of archival material to the business. It also increased demand in certain groups within the company for access and interpretive services. But this visitor center was not designed to be a frontline service point for archives, and it was not equipped to deal with content needs of a large global corporation or the public. Just a beauty shot there of the outside of the Center of Excellence in the Midland Bank building in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. So when we began our work with the company, this photograph, I think, tells the story. The collection was virtually unserviceable. You couldn't even walk in this room. It was impossible for members of the corporate communications team or public relations team to answer requests when they received them, and they were receiving them, as I said, very frequently because of the success of the Center of Excellence. And it was impossible to find the valuable material because it was buried in tons of inessential, useless material. And as I mentioned, you couldn't walk in the archive space, and that lack of room was a barrier to use in and of itself. Just some more pictures to give a sense of what we encountered when we first started our work. As we dug a little bit deeper into the situation, we discovered all sorts of problems. The only system for locating material that was ever devised was broken because of uncoordinated moves of the collection and years of fits and starts toward gaining control over the collection. They had begun some digitization initiatives here and there without proper planning, and the company had no self-service access. There was no way for corporate users to gain access to this collection except to walk into the room and aimlessly rifle through boxes. In 2014, after we had gone through an initial consulting exercise, the company finally realized, because of the fact that the company reached a turning point. 150th anniversary planning exercises were underway. That milestone was approaching in 2016, and the lead up raised internal awareness of the fact that there was this gross disparity between the public face of their heritage management and the behind the scenes reality that the archival collection was a mess. And there was a growing gap between the need for a true repository of memory and the Center of Excellence's capability to deliver any sort of services that were needed for managing and caring for the collection. The company didn't have staff capacity, expertise, or budget to effectively address the problem in-house. So they chose to partner with us to completely remodel the collection, to integrate archival services with the Center of Excellence, to create a heritage resource that was in line with their stature as a leader in their industry. Together, we brought the collection, its physical dimensions in line with the money they had. So we employed that two-level management methodology. Not only did we go through a reappraisal and deaccessioning process for them, albeit not on the same scale as TIAA, we did remove considerable amounts of material that weren't required for historical purposes, and also employed a high-density storage solution for them in order to make sure that the collection was as economical as possible. We established an on-demand support structure that allowed us to supply source material when it was needed, answer requests, support the COE, and manage collection development. Today, the COE is actually able to be both a visitor center and that frontline service point because there is a backroom support structure. There's a online search and delivery tool that allows the center coordinator to quickly search and find material that is needed. But she also has a team of archival professionals here at History Factory who can support her when she needs the extra capacity.
The last bit of that sentence, to support her something.
Yeah. She has a History Factory professionals to support her when she needs the extra capacity.
Gotcha. Just also a quick heads up. There's about 15 minutes remaining for you guys.
Got it. So I'm gonna get on to the next one, Tim, so we can get through the other case study we have.
This is a good one to point out, another favorite of Chris's, and it's important that it's not from Ohio. There's an uncanny correlation to the fact that the generally first recognized business archivist in the country was a man by the name of William Overman from Ohio, and our own Chris Uhas comes from Ohio. So all things archival ultimately emanate from the state. But the case study of Aetna presents a different sort of challenges. And this is a great contextual contrast to the notion of history preservation as distinct from corporate heritage. It may have occurred to some of you that it's curious that a health insurance company would be named after a Sicilian volcano. It relates to its history, and it goes back over 100 years when the Aetna was founded originally as a fire insurance company in Hartford. That beginning, which was curiously enough co-founded by none other than Joseph Morgan, the under the auspices of Connecticut General, the Cigna. And a second company was reconstituted that entered into the life insurance business. The reason I go into that distant history is that today Aetna's business bears no resemblance to the foundational entities that began in Hartford, Connecticut. This gave rise to a concern and then an opportunity for us when the company reached out on the occasion of their prospective merger with CVS Health to consider how they might responsibly preserve, protect, and retain some element of the collection that spoke to its contemporary business issues. The reality is this vast amounts of this collection had nothing to do with Aetna's current business activities. So Chris and the team were able to come up with an innovative series of solutions. But let's first talk a little bit more about some of the background to this. As you've witnessed at Sherwin-Williams or McCormick or some of the other case studies we've shown you, this was a collection in disarray after decades of inconsistent professional oversight. There was a significant quantity of information, as I mentioned earlier, that had no practical reuse value for the contemporary Aetna business. So we were faced with a series of circumstances in which the probability was very low that the company was going to invest substantially in caretaking for the totality of the collection, and that there was a significant risk that under new ownership that maybe all that was there might be lost to posterity. And so there was a priority not just corporately to preserve relevant heritage for ongoing repurposing for the Aetna brand, but also to consider what valuable function might be served by preserving this great historical collection for potentially others in the community. So we wanted to work collaboratively and supportively with the company to help them alleviate the burden of caretaking this vast footprint of content and yet still preserve essential archival information for their ongoing use. In that process, we worked towards an appropriately scaled archival repository and considered taking materials that were not essential to Aetna for a different sort of solution that would preserve them for the study of business history, for the history of Hartford, Connecticut, and importantly, for the tremendous variability of information about insurance practices in the United States in what was at one time considered the insurance capital of America, that is Hartford. The team, in collaboration with internal talent at Aetna, went through an elaborate sampling process, constructing an inventory and capturing the essence of the various holdings. We then produced a retention and deaccessioning plan for the Aetna and a line-by-line analysis of material for inclusion in both the core group and then ultimately final decision was coordinated carefully with and the responsibility of the Aetna itself. And the outcome was, sorry? Oh, okay.
Sorry to interrupt you. Your audio stopped about 10 seconds ago.
Okay, I apologize.
So you might have to repeat. No worries.
So I was just making the point that
you were on the. I'm sorry. Yeah, you were on the retention and deaccessioning plan, and then it faded out.
Right. So in close collaboration with our stakeholders at Aetna and subject to their final authorization, of course, because it was ultimately their approval, we collaborated in designating that component of the collection that we believed had a continuing historic as distinct from heritage value to the company. And then with their authorization, selectively made an outreach to repositories that we thought would have a continuing interest in doing justice with this extraordinary historical collection that had no ongoing business purpose for Aetna and its new framework. So we reached out to a number of potential repositories and ultimately resolved on a partnership with the University of Connecticut and the Connecticut State Library and Archives, and essentially divided the collection into two parts, that which would be retained by Aetna and that which would revert after screening by the company to the public domain under the auspices of UConn and the Connecticut State Library. All of which ultimately and importantly, not just for Aetna, but for future cases of this sort, create an extraordinary potential to invest in meaningful digitization work, to create a shared database for repurposing and access to broader communities of interest. So this is, we think, a very groundbreaking a bit of work that we did in collaboration with the Aetna, and I think it has enormous potential for the future of business archiving. And kudos to our team for having orchestrated it so effectively. I think at this point, we're going to pause and offer our thanks to all of you for bearing with us during this presentation and open up the floor to Q&A.
Thank you very much. We have plenty of time for Q&A because I think our next presentation is in about 15 minutes. So the questions are open. So what I'll do is I'll read off the questions, kind of like a semi-interview style, and between both of you, or both you can answer them together or separately, and so forth. This came from Amy. How long did it take Sherwin-Williams to transition from History Factory answering resource requests to handling them independently?
Important to say that Sherwin-Williams doesn't always answer requests independently. We do help now because we're actually, we hold the collection in our facility. We're operating as an outsourced agency for retaining the collection here, but the coordinator at Center of Excellence and other users in the Corp Comm and Public Relations Department are able to help themselves much better than they ever were able to. So they are searching and answering their own questions quite often. But I would say in terms of time frame, I would call attention to how long it took us to actually get from what you saw in those pictures of disorder to the state that the collection is in now. And that was about an 18-month process. So bear in mind that we have a sizable staff of professional archivists, so we are able to apply quite a bit of labor to get projects like that done quickly. So about 18 months from the time that we transferred it from Cleveland to Virginia, we were up and running. We had a database live, and the company had direct access to the content.
Chris, I have a little sub question.
When you say 18 months, how many full-time people would you say were working on that project during those 18 months?
So it changed. I mean, we were, varying the resource levels based on where we were in the process. But at any given point, the minimum staff level was about 4 full-time. But there were times when we had 6. When we were working in the descriptive phase, for example, we probably had about 6 people working together on the team.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you want to add to any of that first question.
Chris covered the landscape. I may start in on the second one and let him finish that one.
Sure. All right. This is from Bethany. Hi, Bethany. Do you see value in adding 3D digitization to your various archival collections?
So the answer to that is absolutely. Obviously, particularly with object-based or three-dimensional collections, there is a tremendous opportunity. Going back in time, for example, one can see the enormous utility that 3D imaging might have had for the New Balance collection at its time, which would have lent itself to that sort of thing. It is a cost-benefit trade-off. 3D can be quite expensive. Costs are coming down, however, and one of the tremendous strategic benefits of our collaboration with DT and Pixel Acuity is really raising not only our conversancy, but our ability to process cost effectively for those clients where 3D would really be meaningful.
To be able to have created 3D renditions of the shoes would have been fantastic, but I think we were just a little bit early in and didn't really have the ability to leverage that technology. Not sure that we would have been able to do the visual capture on the same scale if we had done it 3D, but yeah, I think it's going to become more prevalent in our work in the archives for corporations. I know this because we're seeing it actually happening on the other side of our business, which is involved in exhibit design and corporate museum, creation, and the types of experiential installations that are being designed by our teams there are requiring 3D capture. And so the fact that it's there means it's probably coming to our side of the business relatively soon. Yeah.
Okay.
This is from Peter. Whew. Okay, how many projects do you take on concurrently? You must have a huge team. Do you get overwhelmed?
Do I look it? Yeah, it is. It can be overwhelming. But I mean, if you think about the Firestone project, that was 4,000 feet of material. It's been going on these are multi-year projects. I mean, 18 months for Sherwin-Williams was fast, but that was only a 700-foot collection, right? The Firestone is 3,500 to 4,000 feet of records that we're working through. So we staff projects specifically. In the Firestone case, we have a team that was formed specifically to work on that project, and they've been stationed in the field in Florida ever since we began. So we have the ability to staff projects at the level that's necessary. But in terms of in our shop here in Virginia, at any given point in time, we may have 4 to 5 projects going on at the same time, but not 4 or 5 projects that are all on the same scale as a Sherwin-Williams or a Firestone. So that there are we take on much smaller work as well. I don't know, Tim, if you got any additional things to add there.
Yet again, I always say these are good problems to have, and Chris immediately has indigestion whenever I go to that observation. But it's true, and I think one of the great strengths as a company that we've been able to project into the market is our flexibility in terms of how we actually implement solutions. We're blessed to caretake over 30 major collections in our archives lab in Chantilly, where Chris is resident and speaking from today. But we also service, as he mentioned, collections outside of that. We have teams in Jacksonville, Florida, and Jersey City, and service collections outside of Baltimore and in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So it is that ability to be nimble and adaptive, I think, that has allowed us candidly over the past 5 or so years to not only more than triple our revenues, but also our staffing to support that business flow. Bring it on.
Next question is from Eric. What role do you see AI and CL in assisting archiving moving forward? I mean, that could be machine learning. I'm not quite sure what CL is.
It's going to play an enormous role. We are not we're not denying the emergence of this technology. We're embracing it at History Factory. At least embracing it in theory. We're not necessarily yet fully embracing it in practice, but Eric and the team at Pixel have done some fantastic experimental work for us to show us what is possible. And we just recently saw the power of it in a project that we've been working on for Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines gave us a purely digital set of resources, about 150,000 images, and well, digital objects. They're mostly images, some video. But we were able to see the power of artificial intelligence in the facial recognition area. We ran the test with an AI model after our archivists had manually done the analysis and descriptive work across this set of material. And we were able to see where exactly we missed people, right? We were able to see that we didn't recognize the face in a photograph and the computer did. And that was an eye-opener for the staff, right? It was a sort of an epiphany, and realized that there's enormous potential for AI to augment the human intervention and to enhance and make more accurate our descriptive output. And so we're ready to begin to implement it. How we do that exactly yet is not clear, but we know it's coming, and we're lucky to be partnered with Eric and the folks at Pixel, and hopefully we're going to be able to scale up from our initial pilot or test to something much larger for Southwest in the near future.
Interesting. Okay, this is from Scott. Do you find that an appreciation for the value of the company's archive is common among executives, or are upper level executives often resistant to investing in the archive itself?
Tim, I'll let you start off on that one.
Of heritage, you may have heard me briefly allude during the course of our presentation to the notion of the brand value of heritage. I often cite, and I think it's an interesting aspect of corporate America, that 100 or so years ago, the concept of a company's intrinsic value was core to the market's appreciation of a company's value. That is essentially trading bands for companies were very tightly within a framework around their observable tangible book value. Those days are long gone. The vast majority of the value represented in the S&P 500 is intangible in nature. A component of that intangible value is most certainly brand value. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the organizations and elaborate studies that have been done to try and quantify the metric of brand value. And it would be our contention that heritage is one of the foundational blocks of brand value. Ironically, one of those sort of counterintuitive elements that we talk about, in addition to selection over hoarding, is the idea of thinking about heritage assets as of intangible value as distinct from tangible value. We often get the question from clients, how much is this worth? And our assertion is that a unique heritage asset that around which a narrative can be woven that is particular to the company and owned by the company has an extraordinary value to it. And that sort of language and understanding, interestingly enough, is often embraced at the CEO level, but sometimes the challenge is getting through the other tiers of the company to actually make that case effectively. One of the opportunities that presents itself in this regard happens to be related to anniversaries and milestones, which is why History Factory spends quite a lot of our intellectual and proprietary capital on promoting effective planning and celebration of milestone occasions, because it is often then that companies are most awakened to the value of their heritage and the need and opportunity presented by investing in their archives for future generations. Chris?
think that was a pretty comprehensive answer, Tim. I think that the main point is that we often don't come into the organization at the CEO level. We don't come in. The door isn't opened for us by senior executives. The door is opened by people in lower management levels and operation levels where teams are specifically feeling the impact of not having access to this content and not being able to reuse it the way they want to reuse it. And so Tim's right. We have to develop a lot of we have to develop an argument, and it takes sometimes years to develop the case that gets us up to those higher levels in the organization. We think we can make the solid case, but it just takes a long time to get the listener. But when we get there, there's often little resistance to it, as Tim said.
Well, we have time for a few more questions. Before I'm gonna read a question on the board, I'm gonna be selfish and toss one of mine out there that kind of caught my mind or ear when you guys first started talking about processing collections. From your presentation and talking to you in the past, both Chris and Tim, it looks like a lot of times corporate entities kind of neglect their archives. You know, they just have a room, they throw stuff in it, they close the doors, kind of like the closet in the house where you don't know what to do with it, you don't want to deal with it, just throw it in there. And you call that kind of a loose organization. It takes forever to find anything. When you start to process that on the physical level, because I assume you have to kind of just get some organization going, how do you categorize it? I mean, you do it by chronology of the company, you think about what products they make, what products they do. I mean, or is that driven by a dialogue with the actual company?
So in a lot of cases, as I mentioned, it is a co-design effort, and we are actually engineering those systems with the client's input. But we do take an approach that focuses on broad sort of facets that represent the major sort of aspects of the company and its activities and its business. So at the topmost levels of most of the systems that we create, you'll find access points or headings like products, people, locations, this sort of thing, which is not uncommon in archives. It's done whenever an artificial arrangement needs to be imposed. It's often it's pretty common strategy, but we try to boil the makeup of the company and its history down into some very basic and sort of persistent concepts as the beginning of an organizing framework. So our strategy is usually simple is better. Fewer levels of subdivision are better. Mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive is best. And that's always what we're aiming toward. But with input from the client, we're also trying to create vocabulary or capture vocabulary that is understood by the broadest possible range of users within the organization. And we're trying to use words that we think are going to be representative of those concepts for many years to come. Oftentimes there's an inclination to use what would essentially be sort of buzz terminology, words that we sort of have a sense are just not going to be used to express that meaning in the future. And so we'll avoid those terms if we can, although sometimes that's kind of a difficult argument to have with the client. But I mean, that's I think a high level view of how we approach that type of work. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much for endeavoring in that. I'm going to put the last question up, and we'll set the remainder of the questions for you folks in our breakout session. This is coming from Wayne. Are you finding that more corporations are keen on creating museums to enrich their brand?
Go ahead and start that one off.
Answer, but maybe in a somewhat different frame. Particularly post-pandemic, they have to be very much within the digital realm, which isn't to say that museums that have a physical base are not still very much in demand. But if anything, the pandemic, of course, has accelerated the need for digital expression. And that's a very important aspect of it. Curiously, that has given yet another lift, thankfully, to our business, but also to the notion of the value of heritage assets and narratives as a component of the ongoing culture, corporate culture of an organization, and this notion of living history that we spoke about earlier. There is always going to be an opportunity to enrich collections and do gap filling, whether it's focusing on an organization's globality, its diversity, equity, and inclusion, its continuing business relevance, and that requires ongoing creation of meaningful content that can be used, and especially that which is in video form, which is increasingly popular among all audiences. You know, one of the curious features of our current age is that not the advent, but certainly the further development of social media requires constant streams of content, and people tire of manufactured, ingenuine content. And the beauty of heritage is that it's real, it's authentic, it's yours, and it's republishable. So it has actually created a spur to demand in that regard. So yes to the answer of museums and object collections very clearly. But with a bit of a twist that it really needs to manifest itself in interactive and digital ways, as well as in the physical realm. Chris?
Add on that, other than it's been strange to see some of our exhibit work in the recent months. So we have just created one of the most extraordinary experiences to date for Verizon in an operations center there in New Jersey, and it's playing to no one. There's no one in the building, so hopefully we're excited that to see some of this work get an audience again. I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon that we've created some of the most technically advanced and engaging exhibit work we've ever created, and it's sitting in dark lobbies, you know.
So that interplay of, again, the physical and the electronic realm is vital to the ongoing connection with the communities of interest. And by the way, it needs to be continually adaptive. Look at the transaction divestiture of AOL and Yahoo. You know, I mean, these were vital components of the organization just moments ago.
Yeah. It's interesting that before everyone was very excited about the idea of incorporating touchscreen technology everywhere, and now we've had to quickly pivot to how to operate screens without touching. You know, it's a strange time.
True. Well, listen, gentlemen, thank you so much for participating at a roundtable, and I'm sure you're gonna get lots of people jumping into your breakout sessions. So don't go too far away.